Now we're going to move on to religions that are a little more contained, although you may find that that's not necessarily true with this first one that we're going to talk about. So what we talk about first is Hinduism. And when I think about religions like Hinduism or Buddhism, a class that I was in years ago that talked about different world religions, the teacher gave this illustration that I think really fits well with how to approach religions like Hinduism or Buddhism or some of these that are less familiar to most of you. And that is to just take a few minutes there in your notes and to make this 9-dot configuration like you see here on the screen. And in this exercise, what you're supposed to do is connect all 9 of those dots using 4 straight lines that are connected to one another end to end. So, once you put your pen or your pencil down and start drawing, you can't pick it up until the 4th line is drawn. So just try that there for a little bit and see if you can make that happen. Now, usually in every class, there's a few students who either figure it out or they've seen this before and they know how it's done. And so I will invite one of them to come up to the board and show the other students how you can, in fact, connect those 9 dots using 4 straight lines connected end to end. And so they draw that out like this. And often, as they're finishing drawing it, students in the class are going, they cheated. They went outside the box. And of course, my response is, what box? Because what we tend to do, the first time I was introduced to this exercise is what I did. What we tend to do is assume that there's a box that these 9 dots represent. And even though there's not a box there, we impose a box on it. And then we try to draw 4 straight lines end to end, connecting all the dots within that box. And apparently that's impossible to do. But if you see those dots as on an open plane, not in a box, then you have ways that you can do that with 4 straight lines. But if you try to squeeze it in that box, it's not going to happen. Religions like Hinduism need to be approached like this exercise. All of us have a box that we call religion. You've got a box of what you call religion. You defined it in that first essay that you wrote back at the beginning of this course. You defined it in the essay that you wrote at the end of the last unit. Your box of what religion is. I have a box that I say, this is religion. But for most of us, if you try to stick a religion like Hinduism in your box, you're going to be as frustrated as you would be trying to connect these 9 dots of 4 straight lines in the box that you imposed on that design. It doesn't work. And I found that especially before I started using this illustration, a lot of students would say, how is that a religion? That's not a religion. But this kind of shuts off that path to say it is. It is a religion. It's not what would fit in most of our boxes that we call religion, but it is a religion. So as we look at Hinduism, I want to encourage you to at least let the sides of your box be kind of pliable. Let them move a little bit, because they're going to have to for you to see Hinduism as a religion. Probably the best way to illustrate that is to start out by talking about things that Hinduism does not have. Because these things that I'm going to tell you Hinduism does not have are the things that a lot of your definitions of religion say that religion does have. Let the box be pliable here, okay? So first of all, Hinduism does not have a founder. Now, I suppose in history somewhere back there was the first Hindu. But nobody knows who or when or where that was. As a matter of fact, within traditional Hinduism or within Hindu philosophy, if you asked, when did Hinduism begin, the answer that you would get is, it has no beginning. It's always been. Hinduism is. Hinduism is life. But for those of us who want to try to put some stuff in a historical context, what we can say is that the earliest known followers of Hinduism were a group of people called the Aryans. These Aryans, which this name has nothing to do with the Aryans of 19th, 20th century Europe, but these Aryans were Indo-Europeans. They were people who migrated from the north down into Nepal and northern India. And they settled along a river that they came to call the Indus River. And so they were a group, they came in, they were agrarian, but they also fought the indigenous people to that area and took over this area in northern India. And this is an area that was basically called the Indus River Valley. And really the name Hindu comes from the name they gave this river. I don't know, I guess I speculate that it's like they named this river the Indus River, and people would talk about those people that live by the Indus River, and eventually just started calling them Hindus or Indusites or something related to the name of the river. But these were the earliest known followers of Hinduism. Now, do we know where they got their Hinduism? No. Do we think they were the ones who originated it? We don't know. But these are the earliest known followers of Hinduism, and they emerge into history around the 18th century BCE. So Hinduism, as we know it today, has been around for about 4,000 years or more. And again, Hindus would say it's always been around because Hinduism is life. Now, before I go on and talk about what Hinduism does not have, I want to step outside on a little tangent, make sure we're on the same page with something. I talked about the 18th century BCE. I want to make sure we know what we're talking about here. There's two ways you can talk about time. One is BC and AD, and another is BCE and CE. Now, the years are the same. 18th century BCE, 18th century BC, same. 2007 CE, 2007 AD, the same. So what's the deal with these two different ways? What do they represent? Well, as most people know, BC means before Christ. Some people know what AD means. Some think it means after death. That's not what it means. AD is taken from Latin, and it's a phrase, Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. And what it means is in the year of Jesus' birth. And so this BC AD way of talking about time is supposed to be centered on the life of Jesus. And that makes sense. I mean, this was a way of noting time that developed in the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire eventually officially became Christian Empire after the 4th century. And so they centered their calendar around the life of Jesus, at least traditionally speaking. This other way of talking about time, the words are before the Common Era and the Common Era. And this was a way that was developed as a more secularized way to refer to time, to take the Christian influence out of it. I mean, that's what secularization means, is to remove religious influence from areas where it once held influence. And so this is religiously based, this BC AD way of talking about time. BCE CE is a secularized way to talk about time. The other thing on a more pragmatic level is this BC AD way of talking about time isn't really quite accurate. I mean, based on our current calendar, the year that Jesus was born was actually 4 BC, or 4 BCE. So this BC AD calendar is actually about 4 years off as far as the birth of Jesus. So it's not even really accurate to say that it's now 2007 or 8 or 9 or 10 years after the birth of Jesus, because we're 4 years off from that. So these are just two different ways to talk about time, to make sure there's no confusion, make sure we're on the same page. So Hinduism does not have a founder, but the earliest known followers we can trace back to at least the 18th century BCE, these Aryans that migrated in northern India. Secondly, Hinduism does not have a common God. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even have a common idea about deity. I mean, you will find some Hindus, and actually probably a lot of Hindus. You'd find this in a lot of the rural areas in India, and 75% of Indians live in rural areas. They're polytheistic. They believe that there are many deities, that there's more than one. The number that sometimes you hear thrown around as far as Hinduism is that there may be as many as 330 million gods and goddesses. So we're talking about a lot of polytheism here when we talk about Hinduism. There's a lot of different deities. Each deity has a unique function. Each deity has a unique personality. I'll show you some slides here of some images of some of the deities. The first one here is Durga. She is a goddess, or often more of what's called a consort, a wife of various deities. Ganesh, the elephant god, the remover of obstacles. Probably if you've heard of any Hindu deities, you've heard of Krishna. Actually, an incarnation of Vishnu, who's another one here you can see. Lakshmi is another consort of, I believe, Vishnu. Saraswati is the goddess of art and learning. Here's a little deity family. You've got Ganesh, the baby, and then Shiva and Parvati. Shiva is the dad, Parvati is the mother. There's your slides of Vishnu. Kind of the understanding of Vishnu in Hinduism is that Vishnu was a god who wanted to relate to humans, and so Vishnu took on flesh and became a person, and that person, as a person, he was called Krishna. And Krishna lived such a perfect life that when he died, he became a god in his own right. And so now you have Vishnu and Krishna, which may sound like a parallel to maybe other religious stories that you've heard. So there's not a common God. And particularly, one way to look at that is that some Hindus believe that there's many gods and goddesses. Some Hindus, as far as deity, believe in pantheism. They believe that there's kind of this one supreme or one God, but yet God is in all things. And so God is in people, God is in animals, God may be in rivers, oceans, the sun, but God is in all things. And that's what pantheism means, all in God, that God's in all things. Some Hindus are monotheistic. Now, these Hindus that are monotheistic would still believe that there are many gods and goddesses. But the monotheists would devote their worship to one particular deity. And so you might go to one home and they might have a shrine to Shiva. And then you might go to another home and they have a shrine to Vishnu. In another home they might have a shrine to Lakshmi. And these are all deities that that family is devoted to. And that's passed down through the sons of the family. So whatever, if you're a son, whatever deity your family was devoted to, then that's the deity that you will have for your wife and your children. If you're a woman, when you marry, then your devotion goes to the deity of your husband's family. But the focus is on one deity, still knowing that there are other deities that other people worship, and there's not a competition or a desire to convert to your deity. But in practice, the individuals are monotheistic within a polytheistic system. Some Hindus would appear to be atheistic. And in some ways, they might be some of the most spiritual of all. But as you start observing their spirituality, if you hear them talk about their spirituality, what you might notice is they don't ever mention God or a goddess or deities at all. That for them, their spirituality is much more of a philosophy of life, a way of life, than it is about worshiping deities. And actually, you'll watch a film where a man kind of explains his understanding of that. Hinduism does not have a founder, does not have a common God or even a common idea about God. Hinduism does not have a common book. There's not a Hindu Bible. There's no text around which all of Hinduism revolves. There's no text that all Hindus would say, this is my Bible. Like you would find in Judaism or Christianity or Islam. Certainly there are some of the oldest, most well-known texts within Hinduism that are very common within Hinduism, but they're not that textually bound. There's a lot of different texts that could be considered sacred, and there's some Hindus that never refer to a text at all. So there's not a common book. Based on that, there's not a common set of beliefs. What one Hindu believes is not necessarily what another Hindu believes. We're going to look at some kind of strains of belief within Hinduism to try to get an understanding of it here in a little bit, but there's not any one body of beliefs within Hinduism. I mean, people in our culture here in the U.S. tend to think that Christianity is really diverse. But, it's really not that diverse. I mean, anywhere in the world that you find Christianity, you're going to find the New Testament and probably the Old Testament. You're going to find Jesus. You're going to find some sort of redemptive act through Jesus' death. You're probably going to find a cross. You're probably going to find certain sacraments, a baptism in some form, and the Eucharist or communion in some form. God as part of that, the Holy Spirit as part of Christianity. The sin and the nature of that is humanity's problem. I mean, those and probably other things are things that you're going to find consistently in anything called Christianity in the world. Certainly there are beliefs then that diverge from that, but the basic body of things is pretty unified throughout Christianity. You don't find a unity like that in Hinduism. You could probably say that karmic law and reincarnation are common within Hinduism. But that's probably about as far as you could go. And even with those, there's a lot of diversity of belief about those. So there's not a common set of beliefs. There's not a common congregation in Hinduism. Hinduism is not about a bunch of people getting together and going to temple. Now, there are Hindu temples, and there are celebrations and festivals that happen at these Hindu temples. But going to a Hindu temple is not a sign of a necessary sign of devotion for a Hindu. The main center of Hindu worship is in the home. And typically in most Hindu homes, there's a shrine, there's an area of a room marked off that's sacred, maybe even a whole room that's marked off as sacred. And that's where most of the worship, if there's any that happens, is in those places. And they may go to temple festivals and temple celebrations, but you could never go to one of those and still be a very devout Hindu. So, if my box of religion says that it's when a group of people get together and worship the same God and have the same beliefs and read from the same holy book, Hinduism is going to blow the sides of the box out of that idea of religion. It doesn't have all those things in commonality, and yet it is a religion. A couple things that we could say about what Hinduism is: it's diverse. Obviously, you could assume that. There's a great amount of diversity in Hinduism. I think a common Hindu philosophy is that there are many ways to practice spirituality, or there are many paths to the divine. And that's a pretty commonly accepted idea within Hinduism. Certainly you can find some more hardcore, fundamentalist type Hindus, but not many. Certainly not to the extent that you find in other religions. So it's very diverse. It's also very tolerant. It's very open to other belief systems. It may not personally agree with those belief systems, but Hinduism has no real critique of those belief systems as long as they don't bring harm to people. So there's a lot of openness to other belief systems. There's a lot of inclusiveness to other belief systems. I think one thing that illustrates that tolerance well is something that one time Mahatma Gandhi suggested as a way to bring peace between the Hindus and the Muslims in India. And what he said back, I guess it would be early in the 20th century, was he said, a way that we could have peace in India is for every Hindu family to take a Muslim child and raise them as a Hindu, and for every Muslim family to take a Hindu child and raise them as a Muslim. And then so these family units would kind of begin to dilute themselves in one another, and maybe there could be peace and more understanding. Now, most Hindus would be open to that. Sure, we'd take a Muslim child and raise them Hindu. Sure, if we could bring peace, we would send our Hindu child to be raised a Muslim. I mean, it's a way to God. It's a way to the divine. But would most Muslims be open to that strategy toward peace? Or for that matter, would Jews or Christians be open to that strategy for peace? You don't find the same kind of inclusiveness and tolerance of other belief systems in the monotheistic faiths that you tend to within Hinduism. Hinduism is almost like a sponge as far as an ability to absorb other belief systems. When missionaries or proselytizers of other faiths try to convert people who are Hindu, that's one of the difficulties, that it's easy to accept belief in other deities. Why not? There's many paths. There's many faces of God. There's many faces of the divine. And so it's easy to accept those and not feel the need to exclude other ideas of divine, which, of course, monotheism, by definition, would have to exclude. So it's very tolerant and it's very diverse. Well, so what we want to do is look at some ways to understand what Hinduism is and what it looks like. And so we're going to do that in our next session as we get back together.